Hey there, welcome back to another PJS Live Dialogue. I am PJS, and I'm so thankful that you guys are watching. This is another pre-recorded interview. Just we gotta try our best to match the schedules of those that are part of my show here, and so we did it at a time where it wouldn't be the most practical to do it live. And so there's no live chat going on right now. But today is a special treat. I'm really, really excited uh, for my friend today because he is actually a chaplain and he is actually on the front lines counseling and meeting with people who are struggling with the COVID-19 virus. And so, really excited today just to hear his perspective because he's actually um, the first person that I've spoken with personally about, again, just what it's like being in the hospitals and being with other patients. And so let me bring in my friend now. This is Caleb. And we had just the privilege, or I had the privilege actually, of just getting to know him a little bit better a couple of years ago. He was formerly a pastor down in San Diego, and some of his students were attending my church plant while they were in college, so that's how we got connected. And we actually have some crossover history, even though maybe we never really met each other, but we have some crossover history in KCM campus ministry because
Oh my
Caleb
gosh.
is from UCSD. He is a former Triton. And so that was really funny just to hear about that and hear some stories about that. But hey, Caleb, you are a chaplain right now. And again, you are kind of in the midst of what's going on, which is this horrible situation. But before we get into that, just for the people who don't know you and just for them to get to know you a little bit better, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself, your background, get a little bit about your family.
Thanks, John. I totally almost forgot about the whole KCM connection from way back in the day.
Yeah,
So those of you who are
you try to block it
from
out, right?
KCM two,
Block it out
two
of your
decades
mind.
ago, those of you who are from KCM 2 decades ago, you probably all know what we're about then. Okay.
2 decades.
Um,
Oh man, that's crazy.
so my name is Caleb. I'm a chaplain resident down here in San Diego at Sharp Memorial Hospital, and I was previously a college young adult pastor at a bilingual Chinese church, and then before that, a youth pastor. I graduated from Talbot Seminary, and then my family and I we've been here for almost 10, 11 years at this point. I've got two kids and they're doing good so far. And so they're sheltered in. Their mom is just busting at the gills to try to get out of the house every now and then. But otherwise, no, everybody's doing okay so far. And I've been in chaplaincy for a little bit less than a year at this point. It's a very different pace of working with serving people from pastoral or pulpit ministry. But it's a really different, but a really meaningful means of engaging the community. And uh, I could not have predicted that it would be so vital and so needed, especially at a time like this. And that's what I've been doing. Still going into the hospital Monday through Friday. I still got, on calls I got to go attend to, and then the occasional weekend, like this upcoming weekend, this coming Saturday, I'll be working and being on call from Saturday night to Sunday morning. So that's what I'm about there, man.
I forgot we actually both went to Talbot too, so we got some couple of crossovers there. Both
Oh man, we run deep, man. We run deep here.
both went to the greatest seminary ever. Um, how is your family doing with the whole adjustment? Your kids, your wife, you're doing the homeschool thing now. Are they kind of just
Mm.
cooped up in the house, waiting to get out? Just speak a little bit about how you guys are all doing together.
Yeah, well, both my wife and I, we both work at the hospital, and but for her line of work, she's an optometrist. They had to shuttle most of the department off, and to be able to make space and to prevent further exposure for patients, non-elective surgeries, and otherwise. So ironically, normally I'd be the one to say, okay, I'm good to go, stay home with the kids, but in this case, she's the one staying home with the kids. But because we weren't too sure how long this was going to last, and there was a slight period where we both were working at the same time, and then our kids were out of school, we actually sent the kids over to our my in-laws who are about 30 minutes out from here. And so the moment that my wife learned that she and the department, most of the department were going to get shuttled off, she took her go bag, and we always had a go bag of some kind in the car just in case something happened. And she took her go bag and went straight out to my in-laws and has been shelter in place there pretty much since the beginning of this whole pandemic. So I would say we've been living apart for about 8 weeks as it is, about two
Wow, I
months.
did not know that. Okay, so this whole time you guys have been in different places because of you guys are always in and out of the hospital.
Well, I am because I'm always seeing patients who have different types of infectious diseases, and to prevent spread or to prevent exposure, I'm the one at home where we live. My wife and my kids, they are with my in-laws 30 minutes away, and so we've had this arrangement for almost 2 months at this point.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Gosh, that must I can't even imagine. So you have not physically been with your wife or your kids for almost 2 months.
No, well, I actually have been like on the weekends when I'm not working, but we try to keep distance. And when I'm there, I'm usually, wearing my own PPE, which is like gloves, a mask, and staying 6, 7 feet away. And because I've got my in-laws there, they're pretty keen on saying, "Hey, you need to stay back. You need to stay back like 6, 7 feet away." And so when we are trying to quote unquote have family time when I go by to visit, it's usually me being in the backyard while they're having meals inside. And there's that point where like I'm seeing my kids through this window, they're seeing me through the screen door, and we're able to play some form of hide and seek, but it's pretty limited because when I get there and my son and my daughter, they know that I'm at the door. I can hear them screaming, "Daddy's here, Daddy's here!" And my son's 3.5, and so he's like bursting, trying to bust through like that invisible 6 feet like line, but he can hear in the background grandma and grandpa telling him, "Don't go past the door, don't go past it, don't hug your dad." And it's a challenge for him. He's got some pretty good restraint at 3.5. And I think in the more recent weeks my daughter's been taking it a little bit harder, because she's so much more used to me being around. And so in the last maybe 2 weeks, I think I started hearing her say more of "I miss you" more and more, where she didn't do that before. And so it's been, I think in that sense, emotionally, the distance is hard. Physically being there is hard because also my kids know that's a point daddy's got to go back home and he's got to get ready for the next day of work. And so we do get some time in person. It's limited because one of us has to go, I have to go home or what have you. And then they have to kind of go back to staying inside grandma and grandpa's house, for the most part. They do take walks occasionally. They on a daily basis, to just get some fresh air and keep distance from all the neighbors. But it's made our family dynamics a little bit different, or if not drastically different than how we were 2 months ago. You know.
I can't I can't even imagine what that's like. And just as you're describing it, I my heart is filled with so much like kind of emotional pain for you. Like to not be with your kids and to be at a distance like that. Oh my gosh, just the sacrifice that you and your wife are making is just so insane. And it's like this is like one of those things where like there's so many people doing it, and I'm
Mm.
watching it on the news, so many nurses, but like hearing it personally from one of my friends, it just made it so much more, I guess, real for me. That's crazy, man. That is just insane. Um,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your sacrifice, man. I think that's such a crazy thing for any dad or any mom to go through, and even for the kids just to be thinking about that. It must be so difficult. You know, again, as a chaplain, you are. I remember you telling me a couple weeks ago that you were going to now start kind of being closer to the COVID-19 patients, and I remember I said I was going to be praying for you, and it's been like almost 2 months now. Um, describe what it's like. Describe what it's like kind of being there. You're not the doctor or the nurse like trying to save a life like physically, but you are kind of saving a life mentally and emotionally. What is that like? And again, give a kind of accurate picture of what this virus is truly like. I think most of us, we just see what's going on the news unless we know nurses or doctors. Um, but give us like an accurate picture from your perspective and what you are doing to show any sort of love and compassion you can to some of these patients.
Yeah, I think I'm going to backtrack it a little bit to like right before the pandemic hit and before we started as a hospital employing different protocol, because I think we had it on our radar at the hospital pretty early in terms of what the impact may look like. And so certain hospitals were saving their PPE or starting to make announcements through the different departments about, hey, we need to save on gowns and gloves. If you don't need to go into a room specifically, we suggest that you either call the patient directly to their room and do your assessments, do your exams if you need to. This is for like all hospital personnel. And then for the chaplains, most people think it's just religious, it's just spiritual matters. When it's really it's helping patients to cope emotionally or spiritually with their circumstances, with their illness, with maybe a long hospitalization. And it's also to help families in coping with a loved one's illness or their situation, but helping them at least see what do they have spiritually or emotionally as resources. So when we started noticing that, okay, we're really going to start ramping up in terms of COVID-19 patients, this is going to be a real thing. We noticed that there was always constant flux and change every single day. There's constant change in certain protocols. There were changes in the way we entered the building. Requirements suddenly came up that we had to wear a mask or get screened. And we still do every day on whether we are exhibiting symptoms of shortness of breath, fever, some of the basic things you could find on the CDC that have already been put out. And when it comes to looking to, being with COVID-19 patients, so we have a few floors that do have COVID-19, either positive, negative, or they're under observation because we don't know how they're going to develop, but they have symptoms of COVID-19. And I think the most common thing that I can, at least attest to, so because I'm not a medical doctor, but at least from just observing and talking with some of these patients, is there is a tremendous shortness of breath. When they're speaking, whether on the phone or to you, it's really hard for them to be able to sustain long sentences and conversations at times because they're exhausted. They have medication going through them. Some of them have recently, been extubated, meaning if they've been intubated, they've been on a ventilator for a while. And so when they've been extubated, it sounds like they've been smoking for years because it's just such an irritant to their throat. But over time, if let's say they have been extubated and they're tested negative and they're going to get better, their voice gets stronger, their breath gets a little bit stronger with some PT along the way and some other interventions. But what I do notice from patients who are positive or negative, or just even like they're not sure what they're going to turn out to be, there is a real sense of fear. There is in just the patient's voice and the things that they're most concerned and worry about. I think that's what's been so scary to see is to hear patients who are so afraid for their life. Not that I haven't seen that before from other illnesses or other sicknesses like, say, leukemia, where people know they're going to die if it's stage 4, stage 5. But with COVID-19, because there's so much unknown previously, and in the coming months, we were only getting a little bit more information at a time, we were seeing patients who were really scared. But it wasn't just patients who were scared. It was also noticing that staff were also very frightened too. Sometimes we would say, "Hey, did you make sure you got your PPE on?" Because that room was they just finished testing that patient. They turned out to be positive. And so I think for the first time I've seen nursing staff and some doctors were really afraid, scared. I've never seen that before, in terms of their expression of it. But when it comes to patients, I think it's fear. That's one of the first things. And then another one is, especially those who've been intubated for a while, and then they've been, when you're intubated, you're sedated because it's really irritating to have a tube down your throat to help you breathe. But when they wake up, it's a totally different world. So I can remember one patient, or a couple patients actually, who they were intubated very early on, maybe 3-4 weeks before, right about the time when the country is going to start to shut down and do shelter in. When they woke up, they realized everybody was, in their homes, the government was doing different things, and they were like, we just woke up to a totally different world. And it was such a shock to be going to sleep one day and the world is relatively normal with this virus thing. And the next moment they wake up, they realize the world is so different. That shock of orientation is just such a mind trip for them. And it's so difficult for them to reconcile what they knew before to what they are aware of. And it takes some time to get them reoriented to things and help them cope with this new world situation then as well, And I think the first thing they also get worried about is family. They get worried about family members, thinking, if I got this sick, did I expose my family members? And the truth is, there are families who live in multi-generational dynamics, like grandma, grandpa, parents, kids, maybe aunts and uncles. Some of them do live in the same household. And for better or for worse, for much more worse, we have seen families where the whole families, whole generations have been impacted by this virus, where we're seeing like different members from the same family come in and they're on different floors of ICU. That's what's been really challenging in many cases for us, at least emotionally, to see this virus really. It's not just impacting individuals or young or old people. It's impacting whole families. And to take it seriously is really, really important, to make sure that we're being safe, not just for our own selves, but for those around us, and especially those who we live with, to be careful with them. I think that's at least the picture I can give when it comes to families and to patients specifically. So that's what I've seen so far.
When you were describing them waking up, it's like a real life version of like Walking Dead, where you're waking up.
Yeah, that first episode, right?
Yeah,
Rick
and
Grimes wakes up. He's like, "What's going on here?"
Right. It's that I never even thought about that. That must have been such a shock to them because they didn't know lockdown happened and all that stuff. Man, just the amount of emotional grief and anxiety that people are struggling with right now. When you described that, that's just what I thought of right away. That is just insane. That is insane. You know,
Yeah.
as a former pastor, besides just the obvious of, well, I'm dealing with people who are in literal life or death situations with this virus. What are some of like the key differences between what you're doing right now and what you were formerly doing as a pastor? Again, you might not be preaching a sermon per se, but other than those type of things, what do you think are some key differences?
I think there's a lot of differences between pastoring and chaplaining, being a chaplain. For one, I think when you're in a pastorate, at least from the Christian evangelical world, you are standing from one faith community standpoint, and you are speaking to mostly people within that faith community. The hope, at least from the Christian end, is that we reach the non-Christian. We're able to speak the gospel, to be the gospel to those who don't know Jesus. From the chaplain's end of it, you are explicitly serving all kinds of people. You may have your own faith background, like mine's Christian. I've been a pastor before, but I'm there to serve other people in all kinds of ways, whether they are Sikh, whether they're Buddhist, whether they are Latter-day Saint, whether they're Muslim. And so, if they're in the hospital, the focus of chaplaincy is to help them right there and then with what is it that they need that will help them in their context and in their circumstances. And so explicit evangelism is probably not appropriate for some of those cases. Some people imagine, oh, you have the chance to tell people about Jesus only if they ask about it, only if they ask about my faith background. And that has happened. That has happened where people say, so, well, what's your faith background? What do you believe in? And then that's an invitation for me to talk about where I come from and then what do I believe if they ask. But to be able to go into like a Muslim's room and say, look, hey, I'm here to tell you and give you hope that you might not even care about. That's not the role of the chaplain in that respect there. So in that way, it is a little bit different from pastoring. But the more I've been doing this, I see them as two sides of the same coin, where pastoring has its value, where you learn to care for people, you learn to talk about theology and doctrine and process it well in community. And then chaplaincy is kind of like a different set of skills and the toolbox of ministry, where you're listening to people, you're providing care, you're providing some counsel as well. And it's more of those type of soft skills that pastoring could really benefit from, honestly. A lot of pastoring that we might see, at least within the evangelical world, is preaching, teaching, the exposition of scripture. Good stuff. And we need that in the application of scripture, of course, discipleship, all the Christianese that you could think of. But what we also miss out to some degree is how to come alongside people in whatever circumstances or mindset they're in. The chaplain does that, where they come alongside a person for a set period of time to help them with what they have right there and then, until they go in different directions, where a patient, in this case, a hospital chaplain, patient is discharged to go home, or a patient dies. And a chaplain is there to help them cope with it, to help their families cope with the challenging circumstances or news or new diagnoses, and to empower them to say, you have the things that you need, or what are some of the resources you can reach for. If the chaplain themselves is a resource, like, a patient wants a chaplain to come by for just companionship, for prayer, to help them process some things, or even to facilitate grief if there's going to be a death at some point, then that's where the chaplain has a role to step in from a pastoral, authoritative way. But one that comes in to facilitate care that is helpful for everybody, and not just the pastor's theological or doctrinal, stance, if that makes sense there.
I think when you said two sides of the same coin, I was immediately thinking about that as well, that there is, just like what you said, like the pastoral side where you're taking care of the sheep of the congregation, but the chaplain side is also something, just like what you said, it's like this type of ministry that pastors should also learn how to do as well. And also, I think they need to maybe do more of it. Maybe it's not being done enough, where it's not just evangelism. And man, I bet you it feels so good when someone asks you that question, right? Hey, what do you believe in? And you're like, yes. But it's not just evangelism, but like there's this center of just service and hospitality and just the ministry of presence that I think a lot of pastors maybe are not doing, or think maybe they could do a little bit more of. And I think that something great that what you're describing is so many pastors are in a Christian bubble, and when you do something like chaplain ministry or chaplain work, you can't just go in there and start quoting scripture. It's like you got to go in there, and this is reality. Like what are you going to say to someone who's about to die? You can't just go in there and quote scripture because you're not allowed to. And I think this is where so much of the work that you're doing is so valuable. But just the skills that it takes to do that, I think, is so valuable and so great as well. I love just hearing you describe that. I think that's great.
Yeah, if I could go on something about what you just said,
Yeah.
about like ministry of presence. That's a phrase we tend to use pretty often, and I think it means something different for everybody. But when it comes to chaplaincy, ministry presence really is a thing, where the way that I understand it, it is your presence that makes a difference in the person, in the way that their quality of their admission is going to be, or their ability to cope with their illness. because so most people wouldn't think the chaplain is considered essential staff. You would think, oh, that's the first thing to go. Who needs that, right? But and that was actually my first thought when this whole pandemic came about too. So I thought, okay, you know what, I'm going to be shuttled off. You know, I'm probably going to go home, take care of the kids. It'll be fine. My wife will keep working. Completely opposite there instead, ironically. But when I talk with it about, you know, with my supervisors and the other staff chaplain and some of the other directors from different parts of the hospital, no, they view the chaplain actually as essential because it is helping staff to keep their spirits up. It's for a lot of them, it's keeping their hope up because when they started seeing me and my other residents walking the hallways, they're like, "Wait, you're still here?" Like, "Yeah, we're still here. Why would we be gone?" I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had with nursing staff who just pull me aside to say, "We're just so glad you're here," because it just shows that, you know, somebody's caring for us beyond the medical side of things, but they care for us emotionally, spiritually, you know. And it's true because some of these, at least the staff, even if I'm not like directly counseling them, right? I'm not able to bill for like being with a nurse necessarily. That ministry of presence of just being there it's reassuring to the staff to say, you know what, we are still here for them. There's some, and for some who do have a faith belief or a tradition, they are, for us, it's representative that, you know, there's something or somebody greater than them who's there in the presence of all the suffering. And for those who are Christian, they appreciate it just as much as I think others do too. So oftentimes I don't do a whole lot of counseling with nurses, but then I do get, "Hey, chaplain, can you pray for us? Can you pray for me on this one?" And I won't even know that they've got a faith background either. Some of them will even say, "Hey, send up a prayer for me," and they're not even, you know, they don't even have a faith. And I think it's just that deep need for spirituality because we're inherently spiritual people. To see the chaplain there, it's that presence of saying something greater than is still here, in spite of all the crazy that's happening in the world. So I think that's such an important thing about the chaplain's role. Oftentimes, I don't have the right answer either. Sometimes I don't even have the right words for stuff. But being there, being present, and saying, you know what, I'm here. We're going to care for you the best I can. Sometimes that's the ministry in of itself. There, you know.
I think
So.
you're a light right now, shining brightly to so many people who are um, just in a pit. They're like in a pit of depression and grief and sadness. And so I'm so thankful that you're there. You know, I want to be gentle and sensitive to all those people right now who are um, loss of jobs, business is about to go away, and I want to recognize how terrible that is, and um, yeah, like I just thinking about that, like I would be so scared, you know, not knowing what I'm gonna do for food or to pay rent and things like that. And so while being sensitive and gentle to that, um, there's also the reality of how deadly this virus is, and there's so many unknowns about it because we don't really know much about it. We're still learning more about it. What would you say to all those people who are hurting? These are hurting people too, because like what I just described with food and rent and things like that. But what would you
Mhm.
say to them who are protesting right now? And they're just kind of demanding a lot of the states to open up and just kind of so they could go to work again. What would be kind of your counsel to them?
Gosh, that's a very big question to ask because when I've started watching some of the videos or live feeds about protesting, not just in around the country, but actually here where I live in San Diego. One of my favorite beaches is in Encinitas, Moonlight Beach, and to see people protesting out there, maybe 2, 3 weeks back, I was just shocked by that. But then I looked at I took a step back and thought, well, why are they protesting? What is it that they are frustrated about? And for the protesters, I can understand their frustration because this is an expression of that frustration. When people go to the lengths of being angry or having some outwardly sense of outrage, where they need to express it, sometimes And in some cases, that's the end of their coping for being sheltered in at home. And this is the best way they can express that frustration at the time. And so in that sense, I can see the perspective why people would go out there, why they would put out signs, why they would picket or, yell things from the street with their friends. Um, is it the most productive? I'm not sure, how helpful that is in that respect. But I think the concern that I have is when people protest, obviously the first one is to be safe about it, because far be it that we see a surge of former protesters coming into the hospitals. I would hate to see that happen. That's one of my first concerns there is, if you're going to do it, first of all, be safe, okay? But then secondly, then I gotta ask us to, well, what is it that you can do? I mean, frustration is one way to express or to do something about your circumstances. But what are other ways that you can look into solutions or maybe stopgaps for the meantime? Because if the long goal is to, I want to get back to work to my former job, that's a long stretch from where we are right now by all estimates. So what's the next thing you could do that's like right in front of you? And that's being aware of present day, what you can do right now. I hate quoting this to some degree, but it's actually kind of true. But the movie Frozen 2, right?
Yeah.
Anna's song, The Next Right Thing, actually is one of the best solutions in some ways. Because if you remember from the movie, from when she's singing it, everything's kind of gone downhill. Elsa's dead, Olaf's dead, Anna cries, that whole thing, right? And so what she sings about is what can I do? Is, I know here's the goal, there's that light at the end of the tunnel. I can take one step at a time, one step at a time. It doesn't feel great to do it, and it might not feel like it's going anywhere, but if it's going in one direction, one step at a time, that's probably the best thing to do. And in spite of all that's happening. And I get that there's some real pragmatic issues of feeding our families, paying for rent. What are some solutions we can find right here and then today? We're in one of the most amazing countries where we are not third world, for better and for worse. So what is available right now? And I think people know that they can dig deeper. They just get frustrated because we tend to think about what's happened in the past is what I want to stay and keep with. But here I am, and here's the future I want to be at. To resolve that, or to go back to the past, may not be a solution. What is the next step to take, if you would, that would at least help for the day, that would help maybe financially, or maybe in terms of food? Maybe you might have to ask your neighbors or some family members or somebody for help. It's humbling. It's embarrassing. I fully acknowledge that. But I know there's people who can say, I can do something next. I can do something next, and it just takes the small steps to make it through to before we can get to where we need to be in the future. I think that's the best thing I can offer right now. If protesting, again, it's an expression of frustration, it is what it is, and I do hope and pray they stay safe. But if they are really worried about, how am I going to feed my family or pay for rent or other things, then what is one step you can take in those ways? There should be something within your scope and ability to do so, I would think.
Yeah, there's so much wisdom that you just shared right there, and that's why I love doing these interviews because I get to learn from my friends that protesting is an expression of their frustration. And I never really thought about that actually. I knew they were angry, but it's almost like this is almost like the only thing they can do and how they can express their frustration. And when you said just do it in a safe way, that's the first time I ever heard that. Just okay, if you're gonna protest, at least protest in a safe way. Be safe about it.
Mhm.
Man, I think
Yeah.
there's so much wisdom just in that one line right there. And I think what you're talking about, just to dig deeper, I think that's just some wise application right there. Um,
Mhm.
During this time, uh, with people frustrated and annoyed and angry, we then see kind of not improper forms of expression of frustration, And
Mhm.
unfortunately, one of the things that's happened right now is this rise of racism against Asians, people blaming Asians, blaming them because they think they're Chinese and the virus came from Wuhan, China, and
Mhm.
they are just horrible things happening. Just people are getting beat up, and it's just so terrible. And share some of your thoughts on that, but also as you're sharing your thoughts, how can we as Christians, as Asian American Christians, respond to that?
Mhm.
Because it naturally makes us so angry. It makes me angry when I see that, when I hear about it. So, what's the best way to respond to that? So, what are some of your thoughts on what's going on with that, and how can we respond to that the best way?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a whole lot specifically in San Diego of that kind of bigotry or race and racism, but certainly I've experienced a little bit, just a tiny smidgen of that. I mean, I was going to go visit a patient who actually had requested a chaplain to come by, and when I entered the room, they said, "Oh no, I don't want to see you." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" They said, "Well, you're Asian, right?" I'm like, "Yes, I am." And they're like, "Well, could I see a different chaplain instead?" I said, "Sure, that's fine if that feels helpful for to you." And from my perspective, when I walked out of the room, I thought, okay, maybe it's because I look a lot younger. People question whether I'm old enough to be a chaplain. Okay, not gonna lie, it's weird. They're thinking because I will dress them in a dress shirt and we don't wear the collar or anything when we're going around as chaplains. Okay, that's not everybody gets it. That's I don't wear a hat like a Protestant collar going into somebody's room. I look like I'm business casual, dress shirts, slacks, and walk into rooms. So I get one or two responses. One, are you my oncologist? You gonna tell me what's wrong with my cancer? I'm like, what are you talking about? So they think I'm a doctor. And then when I tell them I'm the chaplain, they're like, hold up, you're too young to be the chaplain. I'm like, okay, wait a minute here. So I usually get those responses. So when this one patient said, I want to see a different one, I don't want to see you, I thought, okay, maybe it's because he thinks I'm too young to deal with this, okay, to deal with what problems he's got going on there or things he's wrestling through. But when I went up to double back on the nurse, and the nurse said, oh, maybe we should have gotten a different chaplain. He's kind of not partial Asians. I'm like, what do you mean? And she says, well, he's been watching CNN, and he thinks he really believes a lot of the Asians are kind of spreading this. I'm like, oh, okay. So personally, I wasn't offended by that because, and I think a large reason for that is the context that I'm in is because patients are trying to express their frustration with their illness or the world situation. They watch the news in different ways. And if I'm not helpful to that dynamic, then certainly I can ask for a different chaplain of a different ethnicity, of a different background to go and visit him. Sure, that's not a problem for me. In the rest of the world, however, that's a wholly different picture altogether because there isn't protocol per se within the world that is right now to say, oh, we can pass the buck off to somebody. I think it's a challenging space to be in when it comes to either being Asian American, first, second, third gen, or even the fact that we look Asian. Um, this is not easy because it's very personal, and we want to acknowledge that. Hey, this is people who are upset, really. But I also would think that for Asians or Asian Christians for that matter, whatever you are on the faith spectrum, you have to think about it. Again, this is an expression of people's frustration of a situation which is totally out of everybody's control. And if their best response to it is it's all the Asians' fault, it's the Chinese people's fault. For one, we have to give space to say, okay, they're angry, okay, even though it might not be good anger, and it might not be the right assessment either, too. You know, the other part though is to, I would say, at least from the Christian standpoint, is to not to retaliate in the way that they're looking for, because that's not who we are. If we look at the landscape of evangelicalism around the nation, it's got a very different picture altogether. So what about Christians who stand for the things that we are for, that we are about? We want to know people and understand them. We want to be compassionate. We want to be able to forgive, as well too. And I think a lot of this stretches our capacity to forgive out of ourselves. But as a Christian, you and I know, John, we know that forgiveness comes from God, and our understanding of God's forgiveness is expressed in the way that we forgive others who persecute us, whether for faith or for other things too. And so I think for, at least from the Christian dynamic, for those Asian American Christians or even first generation Christians, learn to forgive as much as possible. And if not, ask God for a deeper understanding of forgiveness in order that you can forgive others. The Lord's Prayer goes, forgive those who trespass against us. Forgive us as we forgive those who trespass against us, I think most people understand that, but really, if we want to be able to forgive wholly, we want to know what God's forgiveness is like. And the other part I would say is try to find constructive ways to have a dialogue where it's possible to say, well, is this really the Chinese people's fault? And to hold space for that. And I know holding space is kind of a new thing where it's a phraseology where we're saying we want people to talk about things, right? But when I talk about holding space, it's allowing people to express their frustrations in a constructive way, in a way that's going to benefit all parties, where you can hear each other and not be talking to each other, right? If that's possible, I would suggest having space for that. If you know somebody who's saying these things, and personally, it wouldn't hurt to try to talk it through with them, to say, what are those frustrations? What are they really about there? And then for us in our heart to say, this is them expressing frustration, because I can imagine Asians being pissed off at Chinese, just because that's part of our nature to begin.
So, Caleb, let's say that you had an opportunity to share one message of hope or encouragement, even a sermon, whatever you want to call it. And let's just say all these news channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, cameras were on you, and you could share like just one message to all of America. What would be something that you'd want to share, or what would be something that you would want to just talk about to everybody?
Wow. Wow. I feel like that question should be going to somebody else and not me necessarily. I think a large part of what we're going through, it is very difficult on a variety of fronts. If it isn't emotionally, it's certainly spiritually, psychologically for a lot of people of all ages, because not being around one another, it's hard stuff. Or celebrating different events in life throughout this pandemic is difficult, or commemorating certain things at distance is very hard. I have to help people, grieve at distance over FaceTime as their loved ones are dying in a hospital, and to watch them take their last breath over an iPhone screen. It's not easy. This is certainly not an easy time to get through. But I will say that, people are making progress one day after another, one step after another. And some of the most hopeless folks who I look at sometimes are those who are COVID-19 positive, or they're just recovering. And if that is a mirror of who we are as people, then knowing that the greater community of people in this nation, if not this world, are trying their best to come together, I would say to look towards each other, to help each other the best we can. Yes, we do look to God. We pray, we ask God for help and for mercy. And oftentimes he answers that through people. I think it's an old thing for, us as pastors to be able to say, you could be the answer to your prayers, as cheesy, as cliche as it is, but in many ways it's so true. If we notice things and we're able to help one another, I think that makes all the difference in making it through what we see right now. If you know somebody's in need, what can you do? Who can you contact and maybe rally a couple others together to help out this person? And it's possible still, even at distance. You can DoorDash a meal to a neighbor. You can certainly, check in to see, is there online work for a friend, maybe per diem or something that's one shot that can help out a friend. If you're able to, maybe even gift out some money through Venmo to a buddy who's having a hard time with rent, and I think those little things those make into big things as well, not just to fill an immediate need, but to fill the heart as a big thing to take care of there. And I think people are coming together to try to help each other for the most part. I've seen so much more community good come out of this time than any time possible. And it isn't just into the hospital, but it's also like it's everywhere. In my neighborhood, I see neighbors, asking at a distance, yelling at each other, "What do you need? Can I get you something?" "Hey, I'm going to the store. I'm going to get something. You want to pick up something for you?" And they're not even, we normally would text us to each other, or heck, we wouldn't even text each other's neighbors. I think we're in that kind of a weird suburb, if you would. But I'm seeing more people reach out to each other. I'm seeing kids reach out to each other at distance and keeping precautions, but they're showing love and care for each other because that's what we want to be about. And that's what a lot of people are. Caring communities who want to do that. We're working through the logistics of a virus that's very contagious. And so I think people, we can make this through, we will make it through. It is going to change the way we do things. But I think looking at how some other countries are doing it, how are they making it through, makes a big difference. So we're not just looking at ourselves, but we're looking around globally saying, well, what has worked together? And what can we do for one another in the here and now? So that way we're focusing on the here and now today, but also taking the big picture of, well, what is helpful around the world that we can implement here, and maybe at some point or another implement elsewhere too. I've been watching Governor Cuomo's stuff on a daily basis, and it's at one point he was desperately asking for ventilators all the time, and for good reason, because it's so hard to breathe with this virus. And there's a point where he was saying, we're going to give back to those who don't have enough ventilators. And maybe in the last 2 weeks, he said, all right, we're going to give some to a local state or to a local county. We're at a point where we'll be able to manage, but we still want to give out. And I think that's what will make the difference in terms of what we're going through. Take care of yourself, but also be mindful to one another, you know. And from the Christian standpoint, love your neighbor as yourself. It cannot be any more true than at this time, really, because that's how people gets to see the love of God in action, not just in the words we say, but the things we do. And if anything, try to avoid all the vitriol that's on Twitter or on social media. I mean, so much of it is so unhealthy to feed the mind and the heart, and it runs contrary to what people really want to do, is to care for each other and to do better together. I mean, that's a reason why there's the phrase, we're in this together, not just because existentially we're going through this pandemic, but in heart and in mind and spirit, we want to take care of each other. And so taking care of each other is what I would say is my word there. Take care of each other. Take care of yourself. Do it one step at a time. And if not, then reach out. Reach out. There are people who will want to help. And if you're doing okay, try to reach out a little bit. And that way you're blessing somebody or helping somebody one step at a time. Okay.
Man, what you're saying is something I so believe in. I so believe that right now we all have to rally together and help each other out. And just like this virus doesn't care about your religion or ethnicity, it'll just attack anyone. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, everyone needs to just show compassion and generosity to each other. And so I love what you're saying there. And I appreciate you, man. I just want to say you the man, dude. I just want to let everyone know that you the man. You are just like all the other nurses and doctors and chaplains. You guys, just what you're doing and the sacrifice that you're making, just being away from your family, I think is just such a huge sacrifice that people need to think about more about what you and all the other healthcare workers are doing is just so insane. And so, Caleb, thank you so much for what you're doing. And
Hey.
just before we sign off, I just want to say real quick, have you heard of the Asian American Christian Collaborative? It's that kind of statement of faith that some of our friends actually have put together. And again, it's just people to sign it to say basically we want to just end this racism against Asians, and that racism is just a form of hatred. And a lot of our friends are signing it. And so, if you
Mm.
haven't heard it, I'll send that link to you. But I think it's a great thing to read
Mm.
and to sign. It's just spreading awareness, and I think it's just an important thing to check out. But
Yeah, did was it DJ who put it out a while back?
well, DJ is
I
part.
think I saw something of it.
Yeah, DJ is like one of the people who kind of helped. I don't know if he was part of writing the Statement of Faith, but he was part of that beginning group that
Okay.
started the Facebook group, and he was kind of helping them, I think, with their marketing, things like that. But
Okay.
yeah, I'll send
Yeah,
that
I
link
might
to
have
you.
seen it. Yeah, I've seen it early on, but then I haven't been able to keep track of it just with everything going on in the hospital.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, send it out, man. I would love to take a look into it and see, well, what is our contribution as faith leaders and what I can do from where I'm at too. I would love to see how I can be a part of it too.
Yeah, we're trying to get more churches and more people to sign, Asians and non-Asians.
Hmm.
I think it's a great document. So for those of you watching, I'll put that link in the YouTube description below, and you guys can check it out. But Caleb, thank you so much for your time.
Hey.
Seriously, thank you so much. Thank you so much for what you are doing. You and all the other chaplains that you are working with. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you for the sacrifice that you're making, and I feel just so so thankful that you are doing what you're doing, because I feel like I couldn't do what you're doing just to be away from family like that. And so I'm thankful for people like you, because you're stronger in the mind than I am. And
I don't know about that, man. Some days I'm just feeling like I don't want to be here because some of this stuff is really tough. But I will give it I will give a quick plug for for chaplaincy as a whole. If anybody is a pastor, and I've been talking to a couple of pastor buddies as well, from different churches, and it's challenging because in the dynamic where we're not used to online church and to do it as 100% venue, it's a tough thing to roll through. But more to the point, I wonder as to whether Christian pastors have the skills or the aptitude to really care for people in a way that I'm starting to see what chaplaincy teaches us to do. Um, Pastors, if you're interested in, at least at any point though, look for a CPE program, a clinical pastoral education program, because I mean, just one unit of it is enough to rock your world, to know to see like the suffering that we see on the news, to be there by bedside. If your program's never afforded this for you before, um, this is some real stuff. And it's not that what you're experiencing right now isn't real, but it's like now you can really grapple with those things of end of life or terminal illness or recovery from an illness, because these are things that I believe that we should be able to navigate to some degree. And if not, it makes you a better pastor by the end of the day, to really know how to care for people, to listen to them, to hear them out, and to give space for them to express what they have, and to not always jump into conversation with the solution or maybe a Bible verse necessarily, but to really demonstrate care in a way that they feel safe to respond to you. So if you're able to, as a pastor, looking up a CPE program, I would highly encourage it, because I honestly did not think I would be in this to begin. A large part of it was because I came from college and youth ministry. And it's like, what am I doing working in a hospital? But I believe by the providence of God, I've been placed in chaplaincy way farther than expected for times like this, scarily, because I'm like, I don't know, man, this stuff is tough. But I think what it does, it changes the heart. So you're much more caring, you're much more listening, and more discerning about what is helpful for a person. And your exercise of pastoral authority, your calling in ministry. So far, I've loved every part of it, and to be able to come alongside people, not just Christians, but of all faiths, really, and to see how can I be a light of Christ to them, and to bring joy, to bring hope in the midst of such, challenging times or circumstances for people. And so I think for pastors, um, this is such an invaluable process for you as a minister. If you haven't done it, or it's been a while, I would encourage, get involved in this way, because then you learn to really care for people. So,
All right. So CPE, for those of you guys who are interested, find a CPE around you guys or a website that you guys sign up with. Caleb, thank you so much for all that you are doing, all the people that you are meeting in the hospital and even digitally in the hospital. And thank you for the sacrifice that you're making. I'm going to keep on praying for you, of course,
thank you,
and
Moses.
praying for your protection. And I just hope that everyone, I hope everyone gets out of this soon. So thank you so
Amen.
much.
Thank you, my dude. Thank you.